and welcome. I'm Emily Bazelon. I'm a senior editor at Slate, and I've just had the great fun of editing a series on sex difference with Amanda Schaffer, who's here with me. Welcome.
Thanks, Emily. Hello.
We're living in a world where we're imprinted with the idea that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. And we're here to talk about these two different books that are by women scientists. Their names are Luann Brizendine and Susan Pinker. What do they add to this discussion?
Both of these are self-described feminists and clinicians who've made themselves over into evangelists of sex difference.
And so the fact that they're women and self-proclaimed feminists and also scientists means that they have a lot of credibility in what they write.
Absolutely.
And what's the sort of overarching problem from your point of view in terms of what they do with that credibility?
Well, they paint a picture of sex difference that's a little bit more stark than the evidence really should allow for. They also suggest that psychological sex difference is relatively fixed, when in fact that's not necessarily true. In many ways, the mind appears to be quite malleable.
Amanda, I wanted to ask you about language aptitude. One of the big claims that Luann Brizendine makes is that women talk more and they talk more quickly than men. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so she makes both of these claims in the hardback edition of her book, which came out in 2006. Specifically, she says that women speak 20,000 words a day on average to men's 7,000.
Big difference.
A huge difference. And both
chatting away we are.
Talkaholics. And both the speed claim and the number of words per day claim turn out to be unfounded. And in fact, in response to all the publicity around Brizendine's book, a psychologist at the University of Arizona decided to conduct a new study of daily word budgets. And he actually had college students wearing these recording devices that turned on every 12 and a half minutes all day long. And he came to the conclusion, which was published in Science, that men speak about 16,000 words a day, and so do women.
So basically identical.
Basically the same. And Brizendine says that she knows about this study and she agrees that it disproves her original claim. She concedes that. But in the paperback edition of her book, she still says that girls speak 2 to 3 times more words per day than boys, which is just as flimsy.
And she doesn't have separate evidence to support that claim?
No.
Huh, interesting. And what about the idea that women speak faster?
That she also concedes that the claim that she made in its original form was not founded.
Are there any neurological underpinnings to this whole argument? I mean, we've all hear a lot about brain studies these days. It's definitely the flavor of the month or the year in terms of seeming to offer this really hard scientific proof for these observed supposed findings.
Right. I mean, that's what makes the claim sexy, of course, is the appeal to neuroscience. And there are various claims. One that both Brizendine and Pinker bring up is a study that looked at neuron density in an area of the brain called the posterior temporal cortex. And this was a study by a Canadian neuroscientist, and it found that women, on average, had a closer or a more densely packed neurons in that portion of the brain, and that portion of the brain is associated with language. But what neither of them mentions is that that study had a sample size of 9. It looked at 4 men, 5 women. So it hardly should inspire grand claims.
Right. Wow, that is a really tiny comparison group. And I'd imagine that the people who wrote the study probably were very clear about that and weren't claiming that they had some theory of everything.
Well, I didn't speak to the author of the study, but certainly when you read the paper, it's not hidden that it had a sample size of 9.
Right, right. I want to go back to another question related to kind of general sex difference in aptitude. It has to do with dyslexia rates, because dyslexia rates are different for boys and girls, right? Boys do become dyslexic more often. And so once you know about that prevalence, the question in my mind is what to make of it. Does that end of the spectrum shed light on the spectrum as a whole, or is it really a separate phenomenon?
That's a great question, and I don't think there's a good answer to it. Susan Pinker definitely argues that the extremes tell us something about the rest of us. And it is true that boys are statistically more prone to dyslexia. But when you look at differences in reading ability between adult men and women, the differences are small or close to zero. So it's hard to see the connection or the relevance to the rest of us of these studies.
And that's sort of generally one of the things that you do a good job of pointing out, is that it's not as if there's huge amounts of science refuting the claims that some of the claims that Pinker and Brizendine are making. It's more that they're way out ahead of the science.
Right. I mean, a lot of the things that they're talking about deal with fairly unsettled science or areas that are controversial, and they don't do a good job of pointing out the controversies.